This is the second panel of our seminar, and it is about the results of various polling. I'm very happy that today in this panel we have professionals working in this field. Each of them have very good experience, individual or organizational. As you know, this issue is really very actual and very pressing in Georgia in the recent times, especially when we were following the last elections. We had quite an odd situation when after the polls, we had very different results and people were confused really because of such results, especially when it concerns rating of political parties or other issues. Many questions are raised by the society, and therefore one of the goals of today's panel is to somehow answer these questions. And also, one of the questions that will be of utmost interest will be how to return, so to say, trust in these public polls and surveys, so that the polarization that exists in the public, in the society, is really very deep, and every citizen questions the quantitative methods and others. And recently I've been in one of the radio channels, and one of the listeners asked the question and said actually directly that I do not believe in this survey because nobody has ever asked me, nobody ever called me and asked the question. So probably it means that we need more information for ordinary voters, because erosion in the public may become a very serious problem, and we all understand it well. Also, sometimes the political parties and forces themselves misuse the results of such polls, and lately we heard from different politicians that they would agree to a part of the survey, but they would disagree with another one because it's, you know, against the interests of their political party. And that also somehow facilitates this process of mistrust. I think these public surveys and polls are very important for politicians, for the society in general, because it shows certain trends. We can really identify concerns or issues that are of utmost interest or importance for the society. And of course, the civil society, academia have to play a role in all of it. And this is why we've decided to dedicate this panel to this particular issue. I very much hope that we will have a very interesting panel today, and that we will have very interesting questions and answers, the discussion of the matter. I would like to thank you all very much once again for being here, for participation. I would like to pass floor to Adam now, who will be the moderator of today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Corneli, and thank you to the Georgian Institute of Politics for this important session. I think a very timely panel within the full range of discussions the Institute is hosting in these recent weeks. I'm extremely pleased to be with this panel of professionals, practitioners, and institutional counterparts who are working on supporting polling in Georgia, implementation, but also on the capacity development side. So we should have a very good discussion amongst well-informed participants. And I do hope that those who are tuning in to this discussion will share their questions in the chat box in the first part of the chat function, the first part of this discussion, so that we may capture some of your reactions. But first, I'd like to set the parameters a little bit in terms of what polling is. I think Corneli has alluded to the importance, the critical information they provide in an objective manner to inform good policies and practice. But I think we also need to understand and recognize that independent, nonpartisan public polling is an essential tool for any democratic development. Again, informed decision making. Scientific, non-biased public opinion polls are a type of surveys or inquiry designed to measure the public's views regarding a particular topic or series of topics. Trained interviewers, and I'm stressing trained professional interviewers, ask questions of people chosen at random from the population being measured. Responses are provided, interpretations are made based on the results. It's important, clearly, in random samples that everyone in the population being studied has an equal chance of participating. Otherwise, the results could be biased and therefore not representative of the population. But statistical sampling allows for good probability that you have a cross-section of viewpoints. Representative samples, again, are chosen in order to make generalizations about a particular population being studied. Polls tell us what proportion of a population has a specific viewpoint. So again, it's looking at percentages, proportions, indicators. They do not explain why respondents believe as they do or how to change their minds. That's not the intent. It is to inform through basic objective information. Social scientists and scholars can look at how to look at behavior change if that's the purpose or objective. Again, polls are simply a measurement tool that tells us how a population thinks and feels or perceives any given topic. But more importantly, it democratizes the space, providing people a chance to speak for themselves instead of letting only vocal media or other political actors to speak on the behalf of all. So again, it's bringing different viewpoints to the equation. And opinion polling gives people who do not usually have access to media or other outlets an opportunity to be heard. I'd like to note that just last year, with a new association of pollsters and social scientists here in Georgia, USAID has partnered to launch a broad-based program that supports polling institutions and an association of pollsters. It provides, again, the information that politicians in Georgia, elected representatives and policymakers need to produce electoral platforms, budgets, public services, policies, all the things that our partners here today will speak to in their discussions and comments. So again, different voices and viewpoints can be expressed. I wanted to put that out really as the inarguable or non-controversial aspect of polling. It's there to create an evidence, a body of evidence that informs good policy and approaches for political actors and others. So with that, obviously, there is concern that misrepresentation or lack of information can lead to skewed interpretation. And we see that in Georgia. Again, we have looked to build capacity amongst consumers of polls as well as the association. I'd look forward to some of those discussions coming up in the conversation today. But I want to turn to our panelists now. I hope that has set some of the context, and I will jump in on a couple of other viewpoints later in the discussion. But looking at the agenda, I want to follow our breakout of speakers, and I'm going to turn to John DiPirro, who's the country representative for the International Republican Institute here in Tbilisi. John, IRI, obviously supporting quite a bit of polling around elections. Your viewpoints and analysis will be very helpful to the discussion. Please, John, over to you.
Thank you, Adam, and good afternoon to all of you. Very delighted to be here today, and always to support the work of our colleagues and friends, both on this panel as well as those in the broader field of public opinion research, and of course, our partners at the Georgian Institute of Politics. So thank you to them for organizing. As Adam noted, my name is John DiPirro. I'm the resident program director with IRI in Georgia, with our representative office here. As probably many of you are aware, we do have a range of programs that we cover and that we focus on in Georgia, one of which is public opinion research. And I'll get into a little bit of the details of that in terms of how or to what degree we support public opinion research. but most specifically, it is ultimately designed to positively impact the building of the broader sort of multi-party and multipolar political space in Georgia. So to that end, we contribute to a couple of different types of what we would say is public opinion research. So there's sort of a national public opinion polling, which is, I think, fairly well known to the public. And that's much more of a public activity, where there's also our private polling, which we in some cases conduct focus group discussions. That can be at the behest of different political actors, or they can also be released if they're designed to sort of better inform the general public. But primarily, the research we do is designed to inform political parties as well as government entities on issues that are of chief concern to Georgian voters. So it's important to note that we're not interested in predicting results. It is interesting, and certainly parties, they might use our research to either predict or in many cases disagree with election results or pre-election numbers. But I think in either case, it's not specifically for that purpose. If I were to highlight what perhaps three main uses that we would envision for the research that we conduct would be, the first is, of course, to monitor general trends, right? So there's aspects of economic development, democratic development, international relations, or even media transparency or use. Trending and tracking those issues over a long period of time allows us to see the degree to which Georgia is either shifting, progressing, even backsliding, and it allows us to form some reasonable analyses based on those numbers over an extended period of time. Secondly, is to evaluate sort of the effectiveness and the public mood or opinions towards government institutions. That can be both national and local, as well as the sort of broader ratings of political actors, parties, even in some cases individuals. That's usually the most popular one, and it's also the one that often causes the most controversy. So again, have to be very careful to those ends. And then thirdly is to identify continuous issues that are of particular public concern. Sometimes there's a new issue that has arisen in the public sphere that is popular in the media, or that is based on perhaps a new development, a political development or social, or just a piece of policy that's getting a lot of attention. That's always interesting for us to be able to check and determine sort of what the public mood or opinion is towards those issues, particularly when they're dominating sort of national discourse, whether it's social or policy or social media or whatever that might be. A few points that I kind of just wanted to stress about our polls, and this is again to kind of reiterate some of the points that Adam made. One, of course, is that all of our research is independent and it is nonpartisan. We can't stress that point enough. We're not here to choose a side, and we really have no specific interest in who scores which way in the political space. Our polls all follow distinct and consistent methodological standards. And I think all of our colleagues who are here today can say the same, and we would say the same about their work as well. They typically undergo very rigorous review and editing before ever being made public. And oftentimes they undergo rigorous review before the questionnaires that we utilize in the fielding process are even commenced. So it's a fairly lengthy process each time we do so. And we take that point seriously because there is limited room for error, and because we're aware that there can be criticism, particularly when there is the political realm involved. I would say, thirdly, we go to very good lengths to ensure that our numbers are genuine, right, within specific margins of error. And that gets back to what the respondent sizes are, how representative they are of specific regions. And of course, that we are interviewing the right groups from the right places, but also that the numbers are untampered, right? So over many years of working in Georgia, for example, and I think this is okay information to release to anyone here today, is that all of our reports, the moment they are finalized after an interview, they go immediately, they leave Georgia essentially. They go immediately to our server and to our our expert SPSS system. And this is to avoid any allegations of tampering that might come when, for example, a poll is released to the public. Lastly, I just want to stress the point that polls, even though over a long period of time we can evaluate trends, on an individual basis, they capture a moment in time, right? It's essentially a snapshot. I think we've heard that phrase or word before, but it speaks to a specific period during which it was fielded. So as Adam noted, they don't necessarily explain why people believe what they believe. We can only make analyses and assessments based on the trends and on the data that we have. It's important to note, though, that one of the reasons we conduct focus group discussions is yes, it's for additional data, but it can also it's because it can give us a better idea of why respondents believe what they believe, right? You can assemble a smaller group of people, and in some cases across a number of different groups or locations or demographics, and that allows you to have a more substantive conversation of, well, why do you think X, Y, and Z about this specific topic? And that's fairly useful. We've just finished a series of them now to understand a bit more about the political crisis, about the boycott, about the election reform, about how people saw the last election, and what citizens were actually thinking versus what our specified polling questions indicated. Really interesting results. We'll be releasing those, I think, in the coming weeks. So, but to get to the main point, I think, of why we're here today and the main subject matter, which is on public trust. I think this point's already been raised by both Cornelia and Adam, so I don't want to be a broken record, but I think, as most of you know, political actors, they often tend to criticize one or any other poll. And I think all of us who are panelists here today can speak to that and sort of feel that pain, quote unquote, but they tend to criticize results when they're not favorable. And they often tend to support them when they confirm the party's oftentimes biased opinion. We accept that, I think, as an occupational hazard, so to speak, which is meaning that political actors, that they're going to act in their interests and do what's needed to demonstrate some amount of strength or a position to voters. So we do realize that in most cases can and will happen. But it's important to also note that this leads parties to call into question the professionalism of our domestic partners, right? These are the organizations oftentimes with who field our public opinion polls. And so while competition can be a very healthy thing, particularly among private organizations, it also has a negative effect on the reputation and public perception of the profession as a whole. And really, just kind of simply put it, it reduces trust among Georgians in their own institutions. So I've just come up with some sort of broad but I think important recommendations that we would suggest to sort of better improve trust amongst the public towards public opinion research and towards the field as a whole. I think the first one is clarifying intended audiences. As noted kind of just earlier, polls can easily be used for private research or they can be for public consumption. So it is helpful to ensure that these points are made clear. Political parties, for example, they conduct, in most cases, and certainly the larger ones, they conduct their own private public opinion research, and they should. We encourage them to do that. But oftentimes that can have a very specific bias in terms of how questions are formed. It can be geared in a specific direction that is designed to elicit a very specific result. So while, of course, those numbers in many cases can be trustworthy and the data is still useful, it's important to note that those are not, in most cases, what you would call nonpartisan independent polls, right? Where I think all of us who are here today on this panel do, in fact, engage in nonpartisan and independent polls. So it's very, very important to clarify those points ahead of time. Secondly, and of course, this is one that I don't know that me saying it here today is going to have necessarily any impact, but keeping in mind the intentions of political actors. As I've kind of already touched on, quite often in elections, parties use or even misuse data for their own aims. And again, as we said, well, I said, we accept a certain amount of this. It does have sort of the unintended consequence of reducing public trust in the field as a whole. And that's something that not just we keep in mind as professionals working in this area, but that I think political actors also need to keep in mind. The damage that acting in sort of those interests without regard for how that can impact this field can cause to, you know, a very important profession in Georgia. If the public good is their main aim, then that is something that's worth keeping in mind, because we do want to have trust in research, and I think it's valuable for any country's democratic development. And it's an opportunity that Georgians, I think, have to build up their own institutions or field that they can be using for many years to come, really just indefinitely. So I do hope that political actors, when criticizing, take those points seriously. And that's something that I would just encourage from their end. The third one, and I think this is really just, we can't stress enough, is public education. It needs to exist across a series of demographics or groups in Georgian society, and not just Georgian society, any society. Media being a big one, right? They can cover and they can reach mass audiences with accurate or inaccurate interpretations of data or results. And so it's important that they understand in detail how to interpret those results. And we're taking efforts as we look towards the future to sort of further build the capacity of media actors as they cover the release of different public opinion research. Of course, political actors, they obviously have a tendency to contribute to sort of the public mistrust or misinterpretation of polling results when advocating for their own positions. And then, of course, the most important one is citizens, right? They're often receiving results that are released to the public, and not always are they informed on how to interpret those. So it's easy to form sort of a biased opinion or sort of a confirmation bias, some might even call it, based on whatever it is you want to see or don't want to see. And so again, ensuring greater education of citizens at the schooling level, at the university level, I think is critical to sort of building the larger field of research. And then the last one, and I think gets into that point as we talk about the field, is and Adam has touched on this already, is professionalizing the field. The Georgian Association of Public Opinion Research, which was founded in the last year, it exists precisely for that reason, right? To professionalize public opinion polling, to support organizations which follow or utilize reputable methodologies. This can include elements of making data and results available to the public, which certainly has the capacity to improve public trust in the numbers, how those numbers are reached and how polls are fielded. Making methodologies public and evaluating what are and are not considered acceptable methodologies or professional is highly recommended to professionalizing the field. There is a challenge to that, of course, which is that full public access without proper education, getting back to that point, on the profession can also increase the likelihood of misuse or misinterpretation or confusion as to how results were reached. But nonetheless, having an association like this, it really opens up a range of opportunities that can sort of under one umbrella and with a sort of coalition of public opinion and research organizations or companies contribute to the field, can invest in the idea of increasing knowledge and education and opportunities across a wide range of sectors, so that research and public opinion is in fact invested in and valued from a wide range of groups in society. So I'll really, I think I'll close there because I've probably gone too long already, but ultimately I just want to note that while we're really delighted to support this field and contribute, I think, to the broad range of public opinion research in Georgia, a lot of this falls in line with what USAID has coined as the journey to self-reliance. And it's a global approach. And it really is, stressing the point that it's beneficial for Georgians to support Georgians, right? Both institutionally and professionally. So we hope to continue supporting that process, and so that eventually public opinion research and polling are fully understood and respected as a profession by the public, and that they're designed to benefit public awareness and political accountability. So, I'll stop there and turn it back to you, Adam. And of course,
all right.
For questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And I think you've hit on some very important points, particularly in relation to conflating private polling with public polling for the greater common interest versus potentially for private interests or specific political interests that may be projected to share a somewhat of a biased perspective or misleading perspective. With that, I want to turn to Alan Gillam, NDI's director in Georgia. NDI has been supporting public polling in Georgia for many, many years, and is seen as one of the important reference points for public opinion and perception within Georgia politics and other dimensions. Alan, over to you, please.
Thanks, Adam. And hello to everybody, particularly my fellow panelists, and thank you to Georgian Institute of Politics for hosting us today. When I was thinking about this session, I was thinking back to my first visit to Georgia, which was in 2018. I came over to monitor the 2018 presidential elections. And as these missions go, we spoke to political party after political party who came in and told us, what was going well, what was going badly. And they all had their own polling numbers. So it turns out that they were all winning at that point. Everybody was ahead, according to their own private polling. And, you might find that a little bit ridiculous. You get to the end of the day and 10 parties have told you that they're all winning the election. But it's a serious point in terms of, there are different approaches, different methodologies, but, there are consistent parameters in which polling companies operate. But I always think of the analogy in terms of, NDI's relationship with our polling partner in Georgia, or anyone's relationship with a polling partner. It's a little bit like those who are commissioning the polls are the architects, and those who are fielding the polls are the builders. And I think that's a really important point because, when NDI approaches polling, when IRI approaches polling, when civil society approaches polling, we do it from a neutral architectural perspective. We have a policy aim and a programmatic aim to asking the questions that we're asking. When political parties and when other operators who have a kind of vested interest are approaching polling, sometimes, their approach is how do we look best coming out if we're going to share this with the public. So, who's commissioning the poll and why they're commissioning it is really, really important. And from our perspective at NDI, the last few years in particular, our focus has been to inform Parliament, to inform parliamentarians, to inform civil society about the top issues which are concerning the public. It is a way of us helping politicians and policymakers and stakeholders understand what the public care about, what they wish to see from their parliamentarians, what they wish to see from civil discourse. And it's really important from our perspective to make sure that that information is gathered in a neutral manner and is shared effectively with those who are in a position to influence public life in Georgia and the lives of Georgian citizens. It may then, you might then ask the question, why do we ask about political party numbers? And for us, the ratings of the political parties at any one particular point are immaterial. But when you look at those in conjunction with the policy issues, it allows MPs and political parties to say, okay, I know that my supporters and undecideds care about this. This should be a focus for us. So it's really to help political actors kind of understand, the different dynamics that are working within Georgian public opinion, how Georgians feel about things, so that they can then inform the decisions that they make in terms of the direction of their party, what they do in Parliament, in terms of civil society, in terms of how you shift opinion. I just want to talk briefly about, the public criticism. And, that's the sort of framing of this discussion. And what I would say is that for me, it is the tip of the iceberg of the work that goes on with kind of public polling and across our programming. Yes, every time we release information publicly, we are subject to some criticism, but the amount of work which goes on around that is significant. When we are explaining the results and helping people to understand the results, both in Parliament and civil society, in public forums, with media and the journalists who cover it. And NDI has been working for a number of years now, as closely as we can with partners to help increase the understanding of the importance of polling and the importance of the data as well. And I would say I think that has helped, and I think that it has had a significant impact in terms of coverage of polling and the understanding of the importance of polling. I think our research team at NDI are probably one of the busiest teams that we have. Requests are always coming in from civil actors, from parliamentarians to political party people. We would like you to poll and focus group on this issue, on this area. We have huge partnerships which aren't really seen to the kind of public eye in terms of working together with people in public life on research and data. When it comes to the public criticism, I agree with John, my friend and partner at IRI. It is the nature of politics. But what I would say is, from a communications perspective, as John points out, you can criticize a poll one week if you don't agree with it, and then you can laud it the next week when you do agree with it. But actually, that's a very tactical approach to communication. The logical thing to do if you think that you will require this to laud this poll at some point in the future is to pick the bits that you like and highlight those. Criticizing those who are conducting the polls doesn't really make a lot of sense, because polls, like politics, are cyclical. Public opinion will change. And I think I have the full list of critics from every single political party now at some point or another who have given us a hard time for our polling. But I would say, as I say, that is the nature of politics when you put something in the public domain in a highly charged political environment. But we see the value of our polling in the discussions we have, the educational aspects we do, when public policy has relied on it, when public policy has been determined by it. So when we look at kind of the pros and cons and we weigh up the scales, while we regret the public criticism, and in particular of our partners, the value of evidence-based policy making and discussion outweighs the challenges in terms of public communications for us. I was kind of reminded, because I spoke to a group of young activists and students about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they were asking me about NDI public polling, and I was thinking about before I worked for NDI, and when I was back in politics myself, and I relied heavily on kind of research, data, focus groups. You had your ideological principles, of course, but then you looked at the data in terms of what you emphasized, how you communicated with the public. And I worked with a lot of kind of senior politicians in the UK, and I would put them into 3 categories. There was a kind of average politician who would look at polls and kind of dismiss the data and kind of, weren't convinced by it. And then what I would describe as the good politicians were those who looked at the data and said, okay, this is what the public cares about. I will now respond to that, and I will do things in the good interest of the public. And then there was an exceptional case at the end of, the really great politicians that I did work with. And those were the ones who looked at the data as a package and said, okay, this is where the public is right now, but how do I bring them along with my view of the world? How do I change their opinion based on this data? So there's different approaches to how you look at data and how you interpret it and how you use it. What I would say is that, NDI's approach to polling is completely transparent. Everything is published. Everything is available to everybody. We've taken that approach for quite some time now. We have complete confidence in CRRC, our local partner, who we've built up a wonderful relationship over many, many years. And polling is something which is always developing. Research is something which is always developing. They are innovative, they are bright, they are neutral, and we work closely with them as we develop our approach to research and focus groups. But in terms of a way forward, in terms of public confidence, from my perspective, it will be an ongoing engagement, with the media, with journalists, with politicians, with civil society leaders. That to me has been successful up until now, and I think will continue to be successful going forward. Not everybody is a data scientist, not everybody is a sociologist, but really working on the value of the data and understanding the data and what it means. It's something we've done for a long time now, and we will continue to do. I agree with John and welcome the US-led initiative, in particular on the Georgian Association of Pollsters. I think, it reminded me very much of the UK Polling Council, which kind of standardizes methodology in terms of, everybody can have a slightly different approach, but it has to be within certain limits, so that you limit the field of bias or illegitimate polling. And I think finally, just as a society, as a Georgian Institute of Politics, as higher education in terms of approach to education, evidence-based decision-making is a societal issue as well. It's something which cuts across sectors, it cuts across education, and it cuts across the whole country. And it's vitally important. I think we've all learned a lesson in the last 18 months about the value of scientists, about the value of data, the value of kind of looking closely at evidence and then taking decisions upon that. It's been disappointing to see places which have not followed that, and it's been heartening to see places that have followed that. But it was a tragic reminder of the importance that data and science has, ensuring that as a society we are making informed and evidence-based decisions. But that's it briefly for me. But I will hand back to Adam.
Alan, thank you so much. You really hit on some important points in relation to some of the themes that John had brought up about education, informing audiences, but also practitioners, building social science capabilities, but also transparency. I think very important as NDI is supporting polling, but being absolutely transparent with the data sets that are forthcoming from that polling and the accessibility. And with that, I'd like to segue to Nino Japaridze, who is the Edison's Research's Vice President of Public Affairs based in Washington, but someone who has been involved in research and polling for 20 years or more, so has some very important perspectives to share, particularly from the practitioner perspective, because the first two speakers clearly work closely with polling, but Nino, you were working for the organization that would be implementing the polling at the field level. So with that, Nino, I'd like to turn to you for your perspectives. Again, how do you see trust being more possible within the polling sphere of Georgia? Thank you. Nino. Nino, we're not hearing you. So I think you may be muted.
Yes, you're right. I forgot to push that button. I was saying thank you very much for hosting me today. And
still having difficulties.
Really?
No, I think she's.
Can you hear me better without the headphones?
Okay, Nino, for some reason it's not coming in.
I don't
Why
know.
don't we work
No,
on?
it is actually, I can hear her as an interpreter.
You don't hear it as you're on an English channel.
So maybe you
Apologies.
have audio muted.
Back to you. I had a problem in my side, so it's over to you.
Guess me, Chemi.
Dear, please.
Zalian Karikatul is out that Alberto Pro.
All right, I will speak Georgian. I think we have majority of Georgians in the audience. First of all, thank you very much for invitation. I would like to thank Cornelika Kacia for organizing this panel to discuss this very interesting issue. I remember mid-90s when for the first time, I arrived in Georgia on behalf of the Radio Freedom, and I was looking for local partners together with whom it would be possible to conduct serious research projects, qualitative research, focus groups or in-depth interviews at that stage was absolutely new to the country, and for conducting representative research in the country, serious training was required to train researchers to sort of grow the team, because there was no team of that kind in the country. Today we have students who have graduated, we have teams of professionals, so we have people with specific education in this area, and they received education here in Georgia only. And last year, as it's been said, the association was created, and its goal is to create a professional area and pool of professionals in the field. Well, of course, people have various attitudes to the polls and surveys, etc., and it is absolutely understandable, because we need to know who ordered this, right? How the area or the coverage, how all of that was selected, how the sample design was made, etc. Whether the organization conducting this poll was it acting independently or not, etc. So it starts with the survey design and the survey itself. That includes and working, analyzing, processing data, interpreting, etc., etc. So the reason for mistrust in Georgia is probably that people do not really understand how important it is to maintain independent stages of the whole, throughout the whole process. And people don't trust because they are always trying to find the reason not to, you know, and because they would conduct their internal polls, you know, giving them a completely different picture, and that different picture of their private research is due to the fact that they do not collaborate with the partners who really understand every stage of the survey or polling. We as Edison had many opportunities of conducting such polls, and usually it is the orders come from media for years. We cooperated with media. Our client, for instance, is Formula, and I will tell you that for our client, the most important thing is to ensure independent, professional, and timely polling, so that these data received is processed and then published in a timely manner. Because yes, in Georgia, they do conduct this polling, but this data is not then processed timely, and therefore there is a gap between conducting the poll and then publishing it, and therefore it leads to some questions, you know, why was it so prolonged or procrastinated, if you will. And then the methodology for gathering data is not standardized. The most recent technologies are not used. We always collaborate with local partners. We share knowledge, we share technologies, we convey these technologies to our partners. And as soon as this data is received, the team starts processing data immediately and after verifying quality. And it doesn't happen in the end. This is the simultaneous process. So this quality of data is checked and rechecked all the time at all stages. And therefore, in a very short period of time, we have a possibility of conveying the results and reports to our client. Also, we also value partners who give us an opportunity or allow us to analyze and interpret, to participate in analysis and interpretation of data. And it happens very often through the different talk shows. We're invited to the shows, and questions are asked, and we answer those questions in the open air, etc. So if you look at the surveys conducted by Edison research, and not only in the pre-election period, but the exit polls on the election day, that this is, you know, a large scale and quite voluminous surveys. Thousands of people are questioned and interviewed in one day. And this area is so developed in Georgia that we, on the same day, actually can share the public opinion with the society of whom they voted for, how votes are distributed, will it be at the level of the parliament or local legislatures, or who has become the mayor of town, etc., etc. And when there is no sufficient resources to conduct such surveys, then you have to make a choice. For instance, this year, the local elections are approaching. Many cities will be electing mayors, will not be able to cover all towns and localities, because we don't have such a huge resource, and therefore, of course, we'll have to prioritize. Of course, Tbilisi will be covered, but what other cities will be covered? We'll have to think, or where it will be possible to get and then share it with the society or the public. Now, this criticism, as John mentioned, and Gillam, we, Edison, have also experienced it when the people do not like this data, they would disagree with the data that we present. But the most important thing is for us to be absolutely sure and confident that the whole research, the whole process was constructed correctly with the correct intent and goals, so that we don't take sides. We should never choose sides, and we have to be objective. We shouldn't be in service of that politician or political party. Even if it's funded by the political party, you don't serve this client if the questions are not formulated correctly, if you don't do sampling correctly, and if you don't go back to families where you knocked and nobody opened the door, or respondents were there, etc. It is absolutely necessary to allocate relevant time for each state, and then we will have to go back and revise and double check. I welcome plethora of surveys and pollings. I welcome this activities, multiple activities conducted by NDI, IRI. I think that our methodology is different from the methodology of NDI and RO, especially exit polls, and we provide people with the picture, so to say, at that particular moment of time, and we transfer then the more data we give, the more reliable data we give, the more trust there will be on the side of the public in our profession. We shouldn't be afraid of criticism, and it shouldn't stop or suspend us in any form or shape. Of course, this working with the society is a long-term process, and it is an honor for us to be one of the players in the field. Thank you.
Thank you, Nino, very much, and apologies for the confusion on the audio. Your points are very well received in terms of the community of practice of pollsters and building capability, professionalism, and standards. So I think that that message resounds quite strongly throughout the theme of this discussion. I think with that, we've talked a little bit about polling generally, exit polling. Clearly, there sometimes seems to be different motivations at play, at least in the perception among public or other consumers. And I think that's an important clarification as well. So perhaps with that, I'll turn to Nino Dolidze, who is the executive director of ISFED, International Society for Democracy in Georgia. Nini has recently joined ISFED, but has been working in this space, and I believe it's your second iteration in ISFED as well, Nini. So a real pleasure to have you on the panel, and want to turn it to you for that open question in relation to polling around election time and whether or not that can be helpful or sometimes a detraction for elections and public confidence, and how more trust can be built. So over to Nini from ISFED, please.
I will speak Georgian. I hope you hear me well. First of all, I would like to thank organizers, because I am sure that this is the topic that is not sufficiently covered, and it really requires more attention so that, trust of the public in such polling increases. My colleagues have talked in details how they do such surveys, etc. And I will try to bring the Georgian perspective and say why this trust is so low and what can increase this trust in the polling. I want to start with the fact that Georgian is young democracy, of course, and Nino in her speech has mentioned that our experience is really very young too, and the knowledge of the society is very small, it's not broad, and we know that there is only a very small group of people who really know what surveys are pollings are and what purpose they serve. So broader public do not know and shouldn't probably know what it is for, and what are the details and what is the data and how to express it, etc. And that's why such organizations like ours exist, as well as media, and they have to provide information to the public about the researches or surveys, etc. For whom they are done. That was a question too. When I was preparing for this panel, I've been thinking about it, and here I would like to mention the exit polls or polling conducted in a non-election period or pre-election. So when it is a non-election period, which conducted by IRI, NDI, Edison or others, their target audience is usually politicians, public institutions for whom they are conducted, so that we know what are the attitudes and moods of the public, so that those parties use this data for running their election campaigns or for institutional and policy development, etc. And of course, these reports are public. Any person can get acquainted themselves with those reports, and the aim is that for any person to see what are the needs, views, opinions of the public on issues that matter, so that they can then channel their work in this particular direction. And then if it is about elections, then of course the whole audience is voters, because, counting votes and ballots as soon as possible, sooner than the Central Elections Commission, etc. When it is the pre-election period or non-election, when we try to measure and assess the political parties, we need to know that it's not the result of elections, and it may not be even close to elections, but these are sort of the preliminary again, moods or opinions of people, and then how the political parties and politicians work, it may then lead to either increase their rating or decrease rating, etc., etc. And then, of course, rating, depending on their activities, may absolutely change depending on the election campaign that they would run. So this is the difference between the non-election periods, surveys and or exit polls, etc. I want to mention problems the public raises with regard to the polling. We know that politics and political life is very polarized, and therefore political parties also act in their own interest, and therefore depending on to who the voters listen, and their attitudes are similar, you know, and this is also some sort of precondition for trusting or mistrusting the polling. We've seen that in political parties had different attitudes towards the NDI or IRI polls depending on or how favorable are the outcomes or the data of such surveys. So when voters voters are not professionals in the area, and this is why they rely on media, and media therefore should provide the full and comprehensive picture to the audience. And therefore now I want to speak about the role of media, because it is absolutely crucial to comprehensively and correctly show or convey the results of such pollings. Media is polarized, unfortunately, too, and therefore this polling, the results may be viewed or interpreted by media from different points of view, and of course it differently affects different audiences. Therefore, when we talk about the problems in this area, very often it depends on the parties speaking about these surveys and the sources from where the audience gets information. Another problem depends on the context, and that is the problem where the Georgian voter doesn't speak out loud about their political preferences. This is a part of our culture where voters, for various reasons, may not be willing to speak about their political preferences or which political party they support, etc. It may be because they just don't want to, because it's their personal sort of attitude, or they may be afraid because they may be public servants and it may adversely affect them in the future. And very often when you speak to people or ask them questions, they would know, their answer would be, I don't know. And when we speak about the Georgian voter, we know very well they do not speak really loud again, and they may not even have their opinion, or may not speak and say their opinion about the rating of this or that political party. Well, when it is about social issues or economic issues, respondents are usually very open. They openly and easily speak about their economic hardships, financial difficulties, or whatever it may be, but not the political parties, their rating, etc., etc. So the voters prefer to answer I don't know or I have not yet decided, because they want to sort of keep it to themselves, again due to the Georgian context. And in the end, I want to speak about some possible solutions to increase trust in the polling, because public polling is very important for the election process, and it is regulated by the elections law as well. And it says that the polling data conducted in the election process may even predefine somehow the qualification of the political party. And the law says that these surveys or polling shall be reliable, that they should be 95% reliable, credible, transparent, etc., etc. And therefore, organizations conducting such polling need to talk not only to political parties, but to the society, to voters, about the methodologies that they use, how and why this methodology is selected, or results that are received, after this polling, etc. I think it would be a very good thing. It would be good if media allocated more time to important, significant methodology of public polling, and only this way, by increasing the doses of information, increased awareness of people, will allow for increased trust in public polling. So we have to use different mechanisms and work more with or on voters, if you will. And in the end, I would like to add one thing with regards to exit polls. We know that usually media orders these exit polls, and the trust towards exit polls also depends on what TV channel people watch. So if I'm the formula viewer, therefore, beyond the objectivity, they would just trust because it is formula, and their formula viewers. The same would be in case of Imedi or Tavari or whatever. So they don't go far. So if they trust this TV, then therefore they would trust the polls conducted by this media. And again, the society is very polarized, and therefore any objective information that is disseminated, it can be shown from a completely different perspective depending on who speaks about it. This is where I would like to end my speech, and I want to have us time for questions and answers. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Nini. And of course, I always don't do justice to the acronym ISFED, International Society for Fair Elections and Democracy. Of course, I think that you hit on some very important points in terms of media consumers and the way polling is spoken of and to an audience, and the importance that that also be perceived, if not objectively reported. There's clearly a challenge point there. You can have the best poll possible, but if it's perceived to be informing from one perspective or another in the polarization of potential media polarization, that's problematic. Okay, we have questions in the chat, and I'm going to turn to Nino from Georgian Institute of Politics to refer to this question in Georgian, and we'll have the translation simultaneously. Thank you, Nino, over to you.
Well, hello, everyone. Let me start with a couple of English questions, and afterwards I will turn into the Georgian questions. Translation will be provided anyway. So let me start with the question by Shotak Akabadze, who asks that I was wondering if they could elaborate a bit more on the role of media reporting. What is their role in facilitating the trust in polls, and what are the challenges Georgian media would need to address? There is another question also, like probably we have to collect a couple of questions in a row. Givi Silagadze dropped the question from his colleague, probably like Givi is from CRRC, and probably we have a question from this organization. His colleagues' research, like using a natural experiment and lab experiment replication, suggests that when the government attacks public opinion polls, the public who are not partisans become more trusting in polls. Given that supporters of different parties reflect a minority in the public, This suggests that people trust polls more as a result. Therefore, is the attention we pay to this overblown? And the last question in English, like from Levan Gachishvili, you have emphasized that one of the functions of the polls is informing potential parties, political parties, and individual politicians. Could you please elaborate on how exactly political parties actually use the polling data, especially in the pre-election context? We have one more English question from the chat. Let me finalize English questions with this from Tisana Fondadze. She asks to John DiPirro, often we see a lot of similarity in results of various polls conducted by and for various organizations, though interesting differences are always present in terms of party affiliation questions, such as specifically percentage of don't know, refuse to answer, or non-no party responses to questions on which party is closest to the respondent or which party would respondents vote for is relatively lower than in other surveys, for example, in NDI polls. Is there anything you do differently when asking these questions, or do you further process the data of those who do not name a specific party when asked about it? So we have two Georgian questions in addition. Probably I will read out them as well in Georgian language.
So the first question from John DiPirro: after publishing the results, we heard from the public that they have never participated in IRI or NDI polls, and very often even politicians say so. So is this issue of trust exists only in Georgia, or is it like in many other countries? And another question: the research published by the research organization is incorrectly interpreted by different media and becomes subject to manipulation, and therefore it affects formation of the public opinion. Would be good to know about some sort of protection defense mechanism that your organizations use against manipulations and manipulated information and data. There are more questions, but I think it would be way too many questions. So maybe let's answer the questions so far, and then we could move on to other questions. Thank you.
So I think thank you, Nino. Lots of good questions presented here, many in relation to sort of perceptions around questions and intent. Why don't I turn to John and Alan to first field some of the political party related questions. And so turning to John to initiate the answer, and then Alan subsequently. Thank you.
Should I start with the ones that were directed specifically towards me, or should I maybe go with, as you said, Adam, the party specific ones first? I think Alan could just as easily speak also on the ones that were addressed to me.
Right. So why don't you take the ones directed to you specifically, and generally touch on the other ones, and hand it to Alan for more detail.
Sure, no problem. So thank you all for your questions. Nice to hear a very engaged audience and group here. To the question that was first read regarding what do we do that's different, I wish I could tell you exactly what we do that's different, than NDI. I wouldn't say that our methodologies are 100% identical. We do typically, I can say we have fairly high response rates. Usually they oscillate between about 55 to 75%. Typically, we specifically, we're polling all respondents, not necessarily always likely voters. I can't speak to NDI's position on that, but overall, I wouldn't say we do too much different when we're, I think to the question here, do we process the data further? No, it still, I think, is done in the same fashion. Our questions might be worded a bit differently, which would suggest in some cases perhaps that the focus or the intention might be a bit different. But ultimately, no, I don't think there's any specific additional measures that we're taking that could specifically explain why our results may be different than theirs, or why they don't know or refuse to answer or no to any party might be less. I would still say, by the way, that those numbers in our poll are, they may be less than NDI's, but they're still considerable. And in both cases, for both institutions, mark a significant portion of respondents and of sort of the broader population that does not necessarily affiliate themselves with a political force. To the other question, and this was specifically, I think, also addressed to me, but Alan, I think, can also comment on this one. In terms of the people who say, I've never been called for a poll. I've heard that before as well. I wouldn't say it's a significant number, at least to my knowledge, by any stretch. Typically, our respondent sizes for any national poll can vary from 1,200 to 1,800 in order to maintain a specific margin of error and ensure that we're representatively, I should say, proportionally representing each specified region by population and typically by demographic. So to that point, I wish I had a specific answer to that. I do know quite a few people who've been contacted. I know many people who haven't been contacted. We are in a country with a population of roughly 3.8 million. But we have heard this criticism, and I don't know why a person would specifically not be or be selected, but I can tell you that they are done at random by our fielding partner. NDI works with CRRC. We typically work with IPM, and it's in some ways you can probably take comfort from the fact that I don't know exactly why a person was or was not selected, and that it is done at random, because I shouldn't have my hand involved in the selection. That would to some degree be tampering, right? And so we are not directly involved in the process of selection. So just to those 2 points, I hope those address, and would be happy to answer further questions on that front. And then just very briefly, I'll just drop on the media and politician question. Levan, you had the question regarding politicians. Look, ideally, the results that we produce, they're in many ways, it can inform, I think, a number of responses from, or elicit a number of responses from political actors. Ideally, it should be informing their platforms and their messages, so that they can understand shifts, perhaps, or changes, or priorities from the general public, and ideally using those to craft more citizen responsive messages. Admittedly, it is a shortcoming. We've noticed this issue that parties take very good care, and through our collaborative work have done a lot to build out more issue-focused platforms in the last few years. But the question is always, are they campaigning on those issues? And that I think we've noticed is still an area that requires additional focus and work, and that we are partnering with a number of known and elected political parties to exactly focus on that issue. So it's an important question, and I think it's still one that requires additional investment and focus. And then lastly, on the media role, I think, just the challenge is that media or journalists understand and know, I think, know questions and know what they mean, right? So how results can be interpreted, and how they present the results can either positively or sometimes negatively or incorrectly, for lack of a better term, impact how viewers might be viewing them. So a good example of this is, I think, when often the first question that's always covered by the media whenever we conduct a national poll is, which party has which ratings? That's asking a very specific question about if it was this weekend, who would you vote for? And often it doesn't often or always go into the question of, I mean, we ask who the second option was, who, if that party wasn't available, who you would support. But a lot of times they'll misrepresent those numbers, or they'll combine numbers, or they will they'll speak about them as though they're considerably more certain, and sometimes they'll even do what they call they'll include all the undecided voters, and they'll proportionally distribute them across the parties, and they'll even produce inflated numbers to that end, right? So in all those ways, it's just important, and there's a number of other ways that our data can be interpreted or misinterpreted. But for this reason, building, I think, the capacity of journalists and of media outlets is crucial, presenting to them our results and ensuring that they grasp the data and understand exactly how we're presenting it and interpreting it ourselves before they go releasing pieces or commenting on it in the public eye.
Good, John. Thank you very much. I thought that one of the most hopeful elements pre-2020 elections was the evidence of parties taking on board polling to shape agendas. And I know that IRI and other partners have been engaged in that work. Obviously, there's much more that needs to be done. Alan, I'm going to turn to you for a follow-up on those points.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, John. Yeah, I mean, the IRI are clearly doing something wrong. But no, seriously, I mean, yes, the numbers do differ, you know, but I have complete confidence in the methodology which IRI uses and the methodology which we use. And the reason why I have that confidence as well is if you look at the trends in our polling in terms of party ratings, they mirror each other almost exactly. So yes, we are framing it slightly differently, but the trends are consistent. I mean, we are, you know, we're completely open and transparent about both the purpose of our polling and the polling data. The purpose of our polling is not to predict elections. You know, if I wanted to predict elections, I would ask 25 leading questions about previous voting intentions, how you voted at previous elections. I would weight the respondents based on electoral outcomes. You know, that is an entire poll in itself to try and come up with some kind of prediction. And then I'm reminded of the 2015 general election in the UK, which I worked on, where every pollster was wrong. Because trying to use a snapshot at one particular time to predict the outcome in a future time, you know, is, you know, extremely, extremely difficult, and is never going to be accurate. As I said before, you know, our polling, the purpose of our polling is to inform policy positions, to inform stakeholders about what the public care about. And I think that's evidenced, particularly most of our support in the programme, which is UK funded, that delivers our poll, is focused on Parliament. Not just the parliamentarians, but, you know, research staff within the Parliament, civil society as we work with the Parliament to create good outcomes for people. And I think for me, you know, I've certainly seen in the time that I've been in Georgia, the interest and the appetite which policymakers have for research. You know, they want to understand, care about, want to understand what their areas of need are, and I think that is often reflected in the work that they undertake. So our work is not specifically geared towards elections or political parties. It's an ongoing process of understanding public and public view to inform, you know, policymakers as they make decisions within institutions. On the media, I mean, I'm always very sympathetic to the media, I have to say. I think the expectation on journalists to be, you know, a little bit of everything is quite high. You know, you're expected to be a kind of data scientist, you're expected to be a social worker, you're expected to be a political analyst. And in fact, they're journalists, they're reporters. And I think that's often lost, you know, in terms of the role of journalism. And whenever I worked in politics and I got bad media, you know, the easy out was always to blame journalists, when actually, you know, it's about taking a look at ourselves, you know, as people who do polling, how we communicate that with the public, how we communicate that with the media. Are we framing it in the correct way? Are we providing the necessary explanations to go with it? You know, are we highlighting, you know, the purpose of how it should operate? So, you know, I think there's a temptation to blame the media in terms of, but there's also responsibility on those who are conducting polling and commissioning polling, to go out there and kind of work with the media to help them understand better. And I think that resonates with John's point about kind of education, and making sure that you view it as a partnership when you're trying to share complex data and information with extremely busy journalists as well. I think that it goes both ways in terms of the reporting and the responsibility, but also, are we communicating it effectively through the media, and eventually, the outcome, which is to the public. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
Great. Thanks very much, Alan. Very helpful and informative response. Nino, would you like to share your perspective to some of the open-ended questions here, please?
Name a party. They
Respondenti, dat u nasrulub sam pas
training also work with individual interviewers. Even though we have our established partners in Georgia, every study we approach as a new study, and we always conduct personalized trainings for even experienced interviewers. The questionnaire is always gone from start to the end as if it's the first study. And we support interviewers in their knowledge base and confidence levels as well, in overcoming this barrier of building trust with respondents. It's important to spend time, invest resources, and utilize the capability of self-completing a specific question, even though it might take more time to get out of the household when you have to turn the tablet back and forth between the interviewer and the respondent. So that I would recommend to everyone.
Thank you very much, Nino, for those important comments. So we'll turn to Nino, Nini from ISFED, if you have any final points on these questions, and then I think we have an open-ended question that will be asked at the end. Nini, please, to you.
Thank you. Colleagues spoke in detail about all issues. There were just two last questions regarding what organizations could do. In case of various interpretation of data, and I don't think that these organizations can do much really, because methodologies are selected, explained, published in advance, and I don't think that they can do anything more. And of course, the role of media will be absolutely decisive here, I think. And so if there are talk shows on this matter, if there are such talk shows, it would be very good, of course, because usually when results of polls are announced, usually we see politicians on TVs, and I think the researchers shall be seen together with politicians so that they can provide objective information. I think that can be one of the solutions. And the last question, if the media or this polls and TVs are usually biased, no, I wouldn't look at this from this point of view and not like this. The poll may be very objective. However, perceptions related to this, they unfortunately may affect and apply to the poll. Again, the poll may be very objective and quite good, but these perceptions and attitudes can be different. And TV should use the mechanisms to ensure that this information is not perceived in a biased way by people. I think that trust in polls and their importance increases, and this trend will continue in the future, as everything shall be based on information, and any actions by political parties or institutions, they have to be based on demands and requirements of people, and therefore the data.
Thank you, Nini, for that important contribution. Again, media is coming through as an important theme here in this discussion, and the importance of how polling is interpreted and shared with consumers, with the audience, and the objectivity that's critical to ensure that the results are actually interpreted appropriately. Let's turn now to, I think, Professor Kukianidze. Pardon me if I mispronounced that. Nino, please, I think there's an open question here. I want to turn to the audience and the professor to pose this question. So over to Nino, or from GIP, or the professor to share the question.
We understand that some political parties are unhappy when they get public opinion poll results, which is not in their favor, yeah, and they start critique. But did you have any cases when you thought, okay, probably this critique was right, probably we will not do that, or we'll change something? All this critique is biased, or some of them, of these critical comments could be justified, and you agree that, okay, it's right. I mean, not academic critique, but coming from political parties. Thank you.
Should we all plan to comment? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, John. I did not pick up the audio, so I'm going to look to the panelists to take this question. Thank you. Why don't you start really briefly, because we have a hard stop. We're at the end of the 6:30
Sure.
time.
My response is very specifically no, and that is because we didn't come to that conclusion that we should do it differently, primarily because the criticism is usually not about the methodology in any respect. It's usually we disagree and we don't like your poster for whatever reason. Either they're associated with this side or that side or whatever it might be. Usually they're baseless, but in those cases there's not much we can say beyond, oh, well, we're sorry to hear you don't like our poster, but we rely on our methodology and the scrupulous nature with which we developed and fielded our questionnaire. So no, unfortunately, we've never received a criticism that caused us to ask such a question, but perhaps my colleagues have had a different experience.
Okay, others. Alan?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think every time we've had criticism publicly, I've always offered to meet and discuss with whoever is criticized. I'm always happy to chat through anybody's concerns. These are political parties, Parliament, are our partners. We work very, very closely with them on a number and a range of issues in terms of capacity building and support. So our door is always open to have a discussion. But thus far, I've looked at the concerns that have been raised, and it hasn't led to a shift in our approach. And that remains the case. I still haven't heard a kind of evidenced argument which has convinced me that the approach that we're taking is wrong, does not meet international standards. I'm confident, team at NDI, I'm confident in our partners, but we do look at every concern which is raised. It's our responsibility to do so. And we communicate effectively with partners who raise those concerns. We'd often prefer that they didn't voice them publicly in the manner in which they do, but that's the nature of political discourse at times. As disappointed as we are with that. But thank you, good question.
Thank you, Alan. Nini or Nino, would you like to share your perspectives? If take a pass, Nini. Nino, anything else? I think with that, we will wrap this session up. It's been a real pleasure to be able to moderate this discussion. Some great questions came forward by participants. We appreciate the engagement, and really much appreciation to the Georgian Institute of Politics for assembling this session. I know it's a series of one of the series of sessions in the Democracy Conference session. So Corneli, Nino, and the team at GIP, thank you very much for bringing attention to a much needed subject matter. And we all hope and trust through our various efforts collectively, we will be contributing to enhanced professionalism, more informed consumerism of polling, but ultimately a more informed citizen responsive governance that uses polling, objective polling, credibly to shape policies and responses to the public in Georgia for better governance, better responsive politics. And with that, again, I'll end there. And thanks once again to our excellent panelists, esteemed colleagues, and back over to GIP if they have any housekeeping. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Our panelists, especially Nino Japaridze, I know it was very early, like wee hours there, and I know it's not easy to start so early. I want to remind you that we'll have another panel on June 16th. It will be about the rightist parties in Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova. The policy paper is being prepared, so I very much hope that many of you I will see on June 16th. So thank you very much again, and thank you, Adam, for being moderator. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.